Good evening, everyone. It's Kelly here. I just wanted to get into a topic aside from Canadian politics this evening, since that's mostly what I've been focusing on. Although, can you blame me? Things are crazy here. So, today I just want to get into a topic that I think is fairly contentious, although it really shouldn't be, because what people eat should be their own business. That's really the libertarian way, wouldn't you say? I'd like to talk about veganism, and particularly militant veganism or extremist veganism, and conversely, with that, people who have a strong distaste or even hatred or vitriol for vegans and who refuse to understand where they're coming from. So I think both of these are very interesting groups, and I'd like to try to find, as always, a pragmatic and rational and empathetic middle ground on this issue. So I'll try not to make it too long because there's a lot of ways to look at this. There's a lot of facts and statistics. I know there's a lot of vegans and vegetarians worldwide. I think the number ranges around 22%. I know there are certain countries that are up to 70% vegetarian. So I know this is a fairly common thing, but I'm not speaking about people who just choose to not eat meat. I have great respect for people who choose not to eat meat for ethical or environmental reasons or for health reasons. It's very restrictive and it's not easy to do. But what I am speaking about is militant vegans, or people who refuse to believe that any other way of looking at this is in any way correct. So the judgmental vegans, the one that when you eat a hamburger in front of them, they glare at you or give you that like, well, I'm not going to say anything, but you're a murderer kind of a look. That's what I'm talking about. The people who believe very specifically that there is no such thing as ethical meat. Now, I think, and I'm sorry to say this if you're a vegan, I think that's ridiculous. I think if you want to be a vegan or a vegetarian, that is your prerogative, and I'm all the power to you. And if you want to encourage others to find that lifestyle because you know it's a benefit or you believe in it, by all means, all the power to you. But this whole there is no such thing as ethical meat, I'm going to have to go ahead and respectfully disagree. So to explain my point further, I will use an example that's fairly common or fairly well known in Canada. It happened a few months ago. I will include a link to an article below. And it was at a restaurant or outside a restaurant in the Toronto area called Antler. Now, Antler is a small business owned by a man who tries to support local foods, local foraged berries, local vegetables, etc., and of course, locally hunted game meats and other types of meat from farms. So he is someone who believes in ethical meat, doesn't want to go to, Walmart and buy the tube of ground beef, doesn't want people to eat food from factory farms, doesn't agree with animal cruelty, and has now started his own restaurant with the basically exclusive intention of providing his public meat eaters, carnivores, with healthy and local and ethical meat that has basically gone through what he believes is, the gamut of acceptable check marks. So they're not tortured or hurt, and they're of good quality, and they're local, and yada yada yada. So he's got a good thing going, in my opinion. Now, some people didn't agree with this, and those would be what I would call militant vegans. And these vegans were found to be protesting multiple times outside of his establishment. And my understanding, according to the interview done later with Joe Rogan and further articles, which I will include, this man, I believe his name is Michael Hunter, decided he'd had enough. He'd had enough of his business being interrupted, despite really trying to work with these people, adding vegan items to the menu, trying to have discussions. They were persistent and wouldn't quit. So he decided, you know what, enough's enough. I'm going to piss these people off. And he went to the front window with a dead deer carcass and butchered it in front of them. I believe he actually went later on and ate that particular piece of meat in some form or fashion. So, of course, this stirred up some emotions and was very, controversial to these vegans, and it did make the national news. I found it to be a fairly funny story, perhaps vegans not so much, and I doubt that the establishment owner found it all that funny when he was going through all this as well, but that's up to him. I guess you'd have to ask him. So I just wanted to bring this up because I find it really interesting. It's a really good example of extremism versus what I would consider a very balanced approach to meat and the meat industry. Because on the opposite side of militant veganism, you have people who don't give a shit, who just will eat whatever meat. They don't care. They don't want to be talked to about it. They don't care where it's sourced. They don't think about what the animal was treated like, what the quality is. They aren't worried about maybe supporting the local economy or trading something with the local farmer. And they're not necessarily worried about the health aspects or the environmental aspects. And I mean, I'm not judging that. I'm saying this is the side. And then you have the militant vegan side where there's no such thing as ethical meat. It's murder. It's impossible. So somewhere in the middle, I'm hoping we can find some middle ground here. Myself personally, anecdotally, I have a physical health issue that has made me change my diet lots of times in my life to try to find relief. I have gone vegetarian and full vegan a few different times for various periods and various lengths of times. Now, in those times, I was horribly sick. At first, because I didn't realize that I couldn't eat soy. Now, if you don't know much about soy, soy is not necessarily healthier than milk or necessarily healthier than meat. It does contain large amounts of something called phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens are found in other foods, but they're very high in certain foods like soy. They're also found to be higher when you microwave a plastic dish or something like that, right? So there's a lot of ways to get phytoestrogens in your body. For someone with the disease that I have, it's an absolute no-no, and even further, it makes me just instantly ill, migraines, headaches, the whole works. Just I feel awful. I usually can't work for a day. So it's not an option for me. Now I know that since then there's been lots of alternative options for people who are vegetarian who don't eat soy. Tons of options, whether it comes to your milk substitutes, your meat substitutes, whatever. So I'm aware that there's a lot of options and I have tried them all as well. I have followed vegetarian diets. I have done whatever I'm supposed to get whatever nutrients I need because people claim you don't need meat. But unfortunately, in my situation, I always had a bit of trouble with that. I struggled. And finally, I saw a specialist who gave me the advice, a hematologist gave me the advice that I should eat ancestrally because that's what my ancestors ate. I am from traditionally Scotland, Ireland, then the UK, and now I live in the prairies of Canada. So in a place like Canada, in the prairies, it's very cold. You kind of have to eat meat. Lots of vegans do exist here, but they are at a disadvantage. Most of them have to supplement quite heavily. And for someone like myself, it's just not an option. I feel fantastic now. I'm eating meat 3 times a day, red meat. I wake up, I have steak, I have a burger, I have whatever, and it keeps me going. My color is great. My muscle tone is back. I'm not so skinny after all my surgeries. It's been fantastic for me, even though I didn't think I'd ever have to eat this much meat. So for someone like me to be called a murderer because I eat meat, I just think is absolutely ridiculous. And I think that to say it's unethical when really the unethical thing would be me getting sick would be, I think it's a little bit hypocritical. Now, I do understand the concept of empathy for the animals, but I do think it's fair to note that there are a lot of cultural groups that don't agree with this that have survived on meat for years. Generally, those who are militant vegetarians or vegans are also left-leaning politically. Ironically, they will support things like the rights of First Nations people and be against colonialism. And most First Nations people ate meat. I don't know how you survive in Canada without eating bison in, 1800, but newsflash, they weren't vegans. And a lot of people in this world are not vegans, and that doesn't make them murderers. So I'm really sorry, you guys, if you do think there's no such thing as ethical meat. I really have to go ahead and disagree with you there. I think there's a lot of ways to find meat and do it in an ethical way. And I think everybody is very different after studying both natural and traditional health for years. I know there's not one size fits all as far as a diet goes, and that's not just with vegetarianism or veganism, that is with any other diet. It's not that simple. You have to trust your gut, you have to trust your instincts, you have to know your body, and you have to know what you're doing. You can also end up very sick if you don't do this correctly. Now, I'm not speaking about all vegans. Lots of vegans are happy and healthy and they mind their own business. I am speaking of the ones who are very judgmental and very militant, or who are spending their time and energy protesting the one good establishment trying to sell good meat when they could be protesting some gross factory farm that has, gross violations of animal rights or something. So then on the other side of this, very briefly, to touch on the people who hate vegans, and I know those people exist, or the people who mock them, please go easy on them. Most vegans come from a place of a good heart. Most of them do want to try to be better, whether they want to save the world or they want to save the animals or whether they want to be healthier. They're generally trying to do something from a good perspective. There's no need to hate. But that being said, if you're being judged, I suppose there's always a time to stand up for yourself. But please do consider, if nothing else, if you are a militant carnivore, that you try to be aware of where your food comes from. I think it's always important to try to promote good business practices and the ethical treatment of animals. I always say a blessing for my food. I know that's a tradition in many different faiths. I believe that the more sacred our food is, the better. I believe in, everything from the energy of food and how it's prepared. So there's a lot of ways to make meat eating a positive thing. And there's a lot of ways to be a vegan without being an asshole. So I guess that's basically my message for today. I hope you've enjoyed the content. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share. Have a great evening and be good to each other, not because the government tells you to.